Before the first dinosaur ever drew breath, the Earth was already unimaginably old. For most of us, the story of prehistoric life begins with the dinosaurs. They are where the imagination goes, the great reptiles, the roar, the meteor. But the dinosaurs are a late chapter in a book that had already been running for billions of years. By the time the very first dinosaur appeared, life had been evolving and dying and starting again for longer than the entire age of the dinosaurs that would follow. So today we are going to do something different. We are going to travel back to the world that came before them. A world with one ocean, one continent, forests with no flowers, and rulers that were not reptiles at all, but our own distant ancestors. This is the Earth of 250 million years ago. This is the world the dinosaurs would inherit. And by the end, you will never picture prehistoric the same way again. Let's begin with the ground itself. Around 250 million years ago, in a chapter of Earth's history called the Permian, the planet looked nothing like the world map you know. There were no scattered continents. Every scrap of dry land on Earth had drifted together over hundreds of millions of years into a single vast supercontinent. We call it Pangaea, from the Greek for all the Earth, not a cluster of continents nudging together, a single landmass so enormous you could, in principle, have walked from the ground beneath modern Canada all the way to the ground beneath modern Antarctica, and never once crossed the sea. And wrapped around that single continent was a single world-spanning ocean. So vast it too has its own name, Panthalassa, the Universal Sea. It covered very nearly 2/3 of the planet in one unbroken expanse of water, larger than any ocean that has ever existed since. A supercontinent does strange things to a world. When all the land is joined together, the middle of it, thousands of kilometers from any coastline in every direction, becomes one of the most hostile places life has ever had to face. No sea breeze can reach it. No rain-bearing cloud survives the journey inland. And so the heart of Pangaea became a desert on a scale we can barely picture. A dead red, continent-sized interior where daytime temperatures may have climbed well past 50 degrees, and the same bare ground froze hard at night. Season to season, the swings were brutal. Almost nothing lived there. If you had stood at the center of the supercontinent, you would have seen red rock and shifting dune to the horizon in every direction, under a pale and pitiless sky. But travel outward, toward the edges, toward the coasts and the great river valleys, and the world came alive, extraordinarily alive. Picture a forest, but not a forest you have ever walked through. There is no grass, anywhere. On the entire planet, grass will not evolve for almost 200 million years. The dinosaurs themselves would live and die and never see a blade of it. There are no flowers either, no blossom, no fruit, no color splashed across a meadow. Instead, the wetlands of the Permian were ruled by older, stranger plants. Towering horsetails as tall as trees, giant ferns unfurling in the humid air, and club mosses reaching many meters into the sky. And among them grew the seed ferns, with their odd, tongue-shaped leaves, a plant so widespread that its fossils, found on every modern continent, became some of the first hard evidence that the continents had once been joined. When these vast, waterlogged forests died and fell and were buried in the swamps, they did not simply rot away. They were pressed and heated and slowly transformed over unimaginable spans of time into coal. Some of the coal we still dig up and burn today was laid down in these very forests. The lights in your home may be powered, quite literally, by a forest that grew before the dinosaurs, and there is a strange echo hiding in these forests, a memory of the age just before. In the swamps of the preceding period, the air itself had been different. Oxygen levels had climbed higher than at any other time in Earth's history, and in that oxygen-rich air, The insects had grown to sizes we will never see again. Dragonflies with the wingspan of a hawk, millipedes longer than a person, armored and low, threading through the undergrowth. By the Permian, that great tide of oxygen was slowly falling, and the true giants were fading. But their descendants still crawled and buzzed through these forests, the last shadows of an age of monsters made of nothing but bugs. There is one more thing these strange plants gave us, and it has nothing to do with fuel. Those tongue-shaped seed fern leaves from a plant called Glossopteris turn up as fossils today on every single southern continent. In South America, in Africa, in India, in Australia, in Antarctica. Lands now separated by entire oceans. For a long time that made no sense at all. How could the same fragile plant grow across seas it could never have crossed? The answer, when it finally came, rewrote our understanding of the planet. The continents had once been joined. Those fossils, scattered now across half the world, are the fingerprints of Pangaea itself. The physical proof that all the Earth was once a single shore. And moving through those forests were the true rulers of this world. And here is where the story turns surprising. They were not dinosaurs. They were not even really reptiles as we usually think of them. The dominant land animals of the Permian belong to a group called the synapsids. And the synapsids are the branch of the tree of life that leads eventually not to lizards or crocodiles or birds, but to mammals, to us. The creatures ruling the earth before the dinosaurs were our own distant relatives. The most famous of them wore a sail, Dimetrodon. You have almost certainly seen it. And you have almost certainly been told, at some point, that it was a dinosaur. It was not. Dimetrodon lived and flourished and vanished from the earth millions of years before the very first dinosaur appeared. It was a synapsid, a powerful predator, some of them as long as a small car, with curved, serrated teeth of two different kinds, which is where its name comes from, and rising from its back, a great fan of skin stretched over long spines of bone. For a long time we assumed that sail was a kind of living solar panel, that Dimetrodon turned it to the morning sun to warm its cold blood, and turned it edge on at midday to shed heat. It's a lovely idea, but the honest truth is that scientists still argue about it. The sail may have been for temperature, it may have been for display, a banner to intimidate rivals or to attract a mate. It may have been for both. Even now, 250 million years later, Dimetrodon keeps some of its secrets. By the later Permian, some of these synapsids were becoming something genuinely new. A group called the therapsids, the name means beast-faced, were beginning to look, and perhaps to live, in ways that would feel oddly familiar. Their legs were pulling in beneath their bodies, lifting them off the ground into a more upright, more active stance, instead of sprawling out to the sides like a lizard. Their teeth were dividing into different shapes for different jobs, for cutting, for gripping, for chewing. And there is evidence that some of them had whiskers. Some may have had a covering of hair. Some, quite possibly, were warm-blooded. Think about what that means. Long before the first dinosaur, in the undergrowth of a world with no dinosaurs at all, there were small, alert, warm-bodied, whiskered animals hunting through the ferns at dusk. Not our ancestors in the sense of looking like us, but on our branch of the family. The mammal story does not begin after the dinosaurs. It begins here, before them. But not all of our ancient relatives were small, and not all of them were gentle. At the top of the late Permian food chain stood a group of predators that would look, to modern eyes, almost impossible, because they seemed to belong to the age of mammals, not the age before it. They were the Gorgonopsians. The largest of them grew to the size of a bear, moved on powerful upright limbs, and drove down onto their prey with something no reptile has ever possessed: long curved saber teeth growing from the jaws of a warm-blooded mammal-line hunter. Tens of millions of years before the first saber-toothed cat, the saber-tooth had already been invented by our own distant cousins. Picture it, a heavy-shouldered predator, more mammal than lizard, stalking through a forest with no grass, under a sky that had never seen a bird. That was the apex of the world before the dinosaurs, and it too was about to vanish. Now leave the land and go down to the sea. Panthalassa, the world ocean, was every bit as alien as the land, and in places every bit as full of life. Along the coasts and in the warm, shallow seas, great reefs rose from the sea floor. But they were not built by the corals we know today. Those corals had not yet evolved. These were older reef builders, strange to modern eyes, raising their structures in warm, clear water. Through that water moved the ammonoids, relatives of the squid and the nautilus, sealed inside beautiful coiled shells, jetting backwards through the sea. And crawling across the sea floor in their countless thousands were the trilobites. The trilobites deserve a moment of your attention because their story is one of the most staggering in the history of life. These armored creatures, something like a cross between a woodlouse and a horseshoe crab, had already been swarming the world's oceans for nearly 300 million years by the time of the Permian. 300 million years. Stop and sit with that number. They had appeared and diversified into thousands of species and survived ice ages and survived continents, tearing themselves apart and crashing back together. They had crawled across the floors of oceans that no longer exist. They had seen more of the Earth's history than we can properly imagine, vastly more than the dinosaurs ever would. And then, in what amounts to a geological heartbeat, almost all of it, the reefs, the trilobites, the sailed predators, the whiskered beasts of the forest floor, was swept away. Around 252 million years ago, the Earth suffered the single worst catastrophe in the entire history of complex life. It is so severe and so complete that it has earned a name of its own. Geologists call it the Great Dying. We are still piecing together exactly how it unfolded, but the leading story runs something like this. In what is now Siberia, the crust of the Earth tore open, and for a period that may have lasted tens of thousands of years, staggering volumes of lava poured out across the land, enough to bury a region larger than Western Europe. And as that lava forced its way up, it burned through vast underground deposits of coal and gas, releasing enormous quantities of carbon and toxic gases into the air. The consequences cascaded. The atmosphere warmed savagely. The oceans grew hotter and more acidic and began to lose their oxygen until great stretches of the sea became dead zones where almost nothing could breathe. On land, the baking heat and the poisoned air stripped the forests bare. When it was finally over, the scale of the loss is almost impossible to take in. Something like 9 in every 10 species in the ocean were gone. On land, perhaps 7 in 10. The trilobites, after a reign of nearly 300 million years, vanished from the Earth completely and forever. The great sailed synapsids were gone. Most of the mammal-like therapsids were gone. Life on this planet came closer to ending entirely than at any other moment we have ever been able to find in the fossil record. It was not a single bad day. It was the closest the living Earth has ever come to simply switching off, and the recovery was not quick. This is one of the things that is hardest to hold in the mind. After the great extinctions we usually imagine, the one that took the dinosaurs, for instance, life bounces back over hundreds of thousands of years. After the Great Dying, the world stayed broken for far, far longer. For something like 5 million years, the Earth was a stripped and impoverished place. Reefs gone, forests thin, the same few hardy survivors turning up in the rocks again and again all around the world. Scientists sometimes call it the coal gap and the reef gap, long stretches of stone laid down in these years that hold almost none of the life that should be there. The planet did not just take a wound, it took a wound that refused, for ages, to heal. But it didn't switch off. In the ravaged, quiet, emptied-out world that followed, a world of ash-grey ground and silent seas, a few survivors crept forward into a planet that had almost nothing left to compete with them. And among those survivors was a group of small, unremarkable, agile reptiles, the archosaurs. In the world before the Great Dying, they had been minor players, overshadowed by the beasts of the forest floor. But now the beasts of the forest floor were gone, the old rulers had been erased. And the stage stood suddenly, catastrophically empty. Into that emptiness, over the millions of years that followed, the archosaurs rose. They spread, and they grew, and they diversified. And from that lineage came the animals that would define the next chapter of the Earth entirely, the dinosaurs. So the next time you picture the age of dinosaurs, hold this picture in your mind first. A single continent, dead at its heart and teeming at its edges. A single ocean wrapped around the whole world. Forests with no grass and no flowers that we now burn for power. Seas full of creatures 300 million years old. Sail-backed hunters and small whiskered beasts, our own ancient cousins, ruling a world that would have to be almost completely destroyed before the dinosaurs could ever inherit it. The dinosaurs get the roar and the meteor and the movies. But they were latecomers to an Earth that was already ancient, already strange, and already extraordinary long before they arrived. The world is far older and far stranger than the dinosaurs alone. If you'd like to hold all of this in one place, I've put together an illustrated field guide to prehistoric Earth. Every era, every world, painted and mapped, and you'll find it linked below. And in the next episode, we'll go back further still, to an Earth that was almost entirely ocean, and to the strange explosion of life that filled its seas. Until then, keep looking back, because the deeper you look, the stranger and the more wonderful it gets.